A few students asked if I would make a video just kind of showing all of my interactive notebook pages. We've been creating our interactive notebook in class for the past 2 weeks in preparation for your semester exam. So this is kind of a review of everything that we've covered throughout the year so far, so this first semester. So we started our interactive notebook on the first day, reviewing the order of operations and also just kind of reviewing operating with integers, with exponents, our square roots, things of that nature. So if you are looking at your interactive notebook, just to make sure that it's in order, all of these images that you see, this is the page set up with the title and then the notes that we wrote in our foldable all folded up. Then this is what our foldable looked like open. And then what I did is I placed another foldable on top so that you could see the extra set of notes that we wrote on the inside of our flaps. So these 3 images are all of the same page, and this was on page 1 of your interactive notebook. So remember, when you opened your spiral, we had a blank page. We turned that to where we could see 2 blank pages, and this is where we glued in our order of operations foldable. Then on the next page, you completed your practice. So this is technically page 2 of your interactive notebook. So you would be able to see your order of operations foldable and then this flippable that we folded in. So on the left side over here, I have what it looks like closed up. And then as you folded the flaps over, you completed your solving of the problem on your notebook paper, showing each of your steps. That was done on day 1. Now on day 1, after we did this, we did start with our independent and dependent variable review. So what you're looking at now would be, if you turned the page, this would be page 3 and page 4. Of your interactive notebook. So the first thing that we did is that we took some notes and we reviewed the definition of the independent and dependent variable and then just some of the different vocabulary terms that are associated with X and Y. Then I gave you these little pieces of paper and we cut these into strips and you matched the independent statement with its dependent statement. And then we wrote a sentence to kind of model that. So we did page 3 and 4 also on day 1. So we did pages 1 through 4 on that first day. The second day that you came to class is when we started talking about those multiple representations of data. So we created the foldable with the 4 doors here, and this was placed on page 5 of your interactive notebook. So at that time we talked about a word problem and how to pull from that word problem to write our verbal expression, just kind of pulling out that one sentence that gives us the information or a couple of sentences, things to look for, how to use that to write an equation, to make a table of values, and then to graph. So within our foldable, we basically wrote kind of steps and hints to help you. And then on the page right next to it, we actually did the work. So if you notice, you have this representations of algebra rules glued in on page 6, and this is where we did the problem that was in the foldable. So we pulled out our verbal model, we wrote our equation, we made a table of values utilizing our calculator, and then we created a graph. Then for homework, I gave you guys little slips of paper with verbal models on them, and on page 7 you glued in a blank representations of algebra rules page. And so for your homework, you pulled out your verbal, you wrote your equation, you made a table, and then you graphed your data. Now during each of these days, for homework, I gave you guys a page of your semester exam review. So once we completed a couple of those, we went over them, I answered your questions, I gave you the correct answers, and if you still have questions on these, don't forget I've already made a video on this, but on page 8 of your interactive notebook, we glued in the first 2 pages of your review. So remember, we glued one down and then we ran a line of glue on the edge and glued another one on top of it so that we could open it like a booklet. So at this point, you have filled 8 pages of your interactive notebook. The next concept that we reviewed was how to take a table of values, which they called an input-output table, and we figured out how to use those tables to create a rule, which we said was an equation. So when your foldable was closed, it looked like this. This is what the page looked like. And then as you folded these flaps over, it looked like this. So we determined if the rule was linear or non-linear. We found our slope if it was linear, and we talked about why it wasn't linear and some things that we could do. Then we developed our rule. So this is what page 9 looks like closed up, and then this is what it would look like once you opened your foldable. On page 10 of your interactive notebook, you actually practice what you had learned. So we had this domain and range tables, finding the rule little booklet, and when you opened it up, there were 4 tables, and you guys were supposed to do the same thing that we had just done. So you were practicing. You were determining if the relationships were linear and then developing that rule. The next day when you came to class is when we made our pinwheel foldable, and so this goes on page 11, and this was our review of graphing linear equations. So we divided our foldable into 4 coordinate planes, and then we graphed those equations that were given. Now I gave you 2 ways to do that. We reviewed how to graph from slope-intercept form by hand, but I also reviewed that process of using a calculator. So while you were in class, we went ahead and we did one example together. So I gave you a blank template and I gave you an equation, and we made a table, and then we graphed. That was done on page 12 in your interactive notebook. And then I assigned you for homework another equation. So we turned the page and glue another blank template on page 13. And then I gave you this equation, and you were supposed to make a table and a graph. At that point, as I said before, each day I had been giving you 1 page of your semester exam review. So when you arrived in class, after you had completed a few more pages, we went ahead on page 14 and glued in 2 more pages of your review. So you glued one down, then you ran a line of glue on the outside edge and glued another one on top. So you now have completed 4 pages of your semester exam review. The next day that you came in, we reviewed the concept of how to identify if something was a function, and we did that little card sort. So we started out the day, and I taught you guys how to make an envelope using unit origami, and we labeled them functions and non-functions. And then I had you guys cut out those cards, and we did a card sort. So every equation, set of ordered pairs, or mapping that represented a function, we put in our function envelope, and all the ones that were not functions, we put in our non-functions envelope. This took up 2 pages in our interactive notebook. We glued our function card and we wrote our notes on page 15, and we had our non-function envelope on page 16. The last page that we created a foldable for in our interactive notebook was page 17. And that foldable kind of took everything that we talked about and rolled it into a word problem. So it was the one that said real life functions. Remember, it was the one that had the little curly edge on it so that we could fold and keep it closed. And so that was on page 17. This is what the page looks like with the foldable closed up, and this is what your foldable looked like after we solved both of those problems and created our equation, table, and graph. Today we will be finishing page 18 in our interactive notebook, and what we will be doing there is we will put the remainder of our semester exam review. So I will answer questions today in class, and we will glue those in on page 18. Please study for your semester exam review. You have your interactive notebook. I will also be making another video with your linear review book, which would be another thing for you guys to look at that would be a great resource. And then obviously your semester exam review. You guys have a great day.